Greetings, we are the Ministry of the Real Truth, and we are presenting you today this book titled History of the Christian Religion to the Year 200 by Charles Burlingame Waite, born 1824, died 1909. Publication date 1881. Topics: Church history, primitive and early church around 30 to 600. Published in Chicago by C.V. Waite. And below it has here copyright evidence reported by Judy Jordan for Item History, etc., on May 30, 2007. No visible notice of copyright. Exact publication date unknown. So we believe this won't generate us a copyright claim or a copyright strike. This was not intentional. We only put this to all for educational purposes and educational purposes alone. So you're probably wondering, who was Charles Burlingame Waite? Well, we tried to find information on him online. We found very little. Pretty similar in detail. Charles Burlingame Waite was born in Wayne County, New York, USA, 29 January 1824, 1909. That's when he died. Was a United States lawyer, jurist and author. He was educated at Knox College, Illinois, studied law at Galesburg and Rock Island, and was admitted to the bar in 1847. After 15 years successful practice, chiefly in Chicago, he was appointed by President Abraham Lincoln in 1862 Associate Judge of the Utah Supreme Court. In 1865, he resigned this post and became a District Attorney of Idaho, and a year later he returned to Chicago and devoted himself to literary pursuits. In 1854, he married Catherine Van Valkenburg, also a lawyer and author concerned with women's suffrage issues. They had 8 children. Writings: History of the Christian Religion in the Year 200, 1881. He made numerous contributions to the press on suffrage and other political legal questions. And then we found some more information on him, probably same in detail. Charles Burlingame Waite. Charles Burlingame Waite, Wayne County, New York. You're pretty much the same information. They had 8 children. And then a third, very much the same. We did find one online that said he had 9 children. So it varied there. So that's basically all about him. Let's return to this particular book. And it has the Cincinnati Daily Gazette newspaper article here. Chas B. Waite's history. A lawyer's report to disprove the truth of the Gospels. His arguments as to the authorship of the evangelist narratives, indications of profuse but heretical. Is that what it's saying? Look at that word, that's very hard to see. Uncritical learning. His arguments as to the authorship of the evangelist narratives, indication of profuse but uncritical learning. History of the Christian Religion to the Year 200 by Chas B. Waite. Yeah, it's supposed to be Charles, right? They call it Chas. Is the contribution of a Chicago lawyer and judge to anti-Christian literature. Like most writers of his class, Mr. Waite has a hypothesis of his own by which to explain the origin of Christianity on natural grounds, or rather he has pieced up 2 or 3 old theories of which only the garnishing is original. By repudiation or omitting to say a good deal that has been said before, he shows his dissatisfaction with former attempts, and it now remains to see whether his own plan will prove more effectual. He admits the historical existence of Christ and the genuineness of 10 Pauline epistles, but denies that the 4 Gospels came into existence before AD 170 to 185, asserting that the miraculous birth of Christ, his intricacies or emphases. And actually, you can't really see it, it's really hard to see. Okay, put the magnifying glass a bit further. Correction there. His miracles and material resurrection were not known in the first century. He contends that Marcion's garbled version of Luke was the primitive third gospel, cites every mention that the fathers have made of apocryphal writings, and endeavours to make it appear that the early church was overrun with documents, documentation, can't really see that word, of this kind before the present canonical Gospels were known, while maintaining that belief in the supernatural characteristics of Christ was a late evolution. He inconsistently enough ascribes priority to the existing apocryphal Gospels, the Proto-Evangelion, the Infancy, and Nicodemus or Acts of Pilate, as the last named is often called. These, as is well known, swarm with absurd stories, while to other respects they harmonise with the general run of the narratives of the canonical Gospels. Thus, in this instant, the evolution of myth has gone backward, and the later developments of alleged fables are the more free from extravagances. Furthermore, he contends that these apocryphal Gospels were largely importations from India. The accounts of the Star of Bethlehem are founded on an old prophecy of Zoroaster, while Krishna, as described in the Bhagavad Purana, was a prototype of the wonder-working Christ. Mr. Waite professes great reverence for the divine teachings of Christ, yet, singularly enough, endeavours to lower his character by repeating, by way of comparison, fables which Heracles told respectively respecting Apollonius of Tyana, a century and a quarter after the latter's death, taking advantage of a time when the Christians were suffering from persecution, for the publication of his romance. One author also finds a fit parallel for the suffering Redeemer in Alexander of Abonotaicus, the juggler exposed by Lucan. This much for his scheme of denial. In reply, we have to say that much of it is not new, and what is new is already untenable. In the first place, no skeptic of honesty and ability pretends to ascribe so late a date of 170 AD, even for the composition of the Gospel of John. Most unbelieving German scholars, if we are not mistaken, Mr. Waite is unacquainted with German, refer it to a period earlier than 130 AD, while they unhesitatingly admit that the three synoptical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and Luke, were productions of the first century, and some of them hold that they were written before the destruction of Jerusalem. Dr. Era Abbott, looks like E-A-R-A, Abbott, in his external evidences of the apostolic origin of the fourth Gospel, has well nigh demonstrated its use by Justin Martyr as early as AD 145, and the remaining links of evidence connecting it with the close of the first century are equally strong. Even that obstinate leader of a forlorn hope, the author of Supernatural Religion, has been obliged to concede that Luke anticipated Marcion, not Marcion Luke, and in this has taken up the universal voice of antiquity and the well-nigh universal documentation of modern criticism. Why he did so in his 7th edition, after affirming the contrary in the first 6 issues of his Word, the reader will see by consulting the arguments of Dr. Sanday's masterly little volume, The Gospels in the 2nd Century, a work to be found in our public library. Second, there is abundant evidence that the Church and all the heretics, save one little sect, whose name Mr. Waite misspells, accepted from the 1st century facts as true regarding the origin of Christianity, and that these facts are precisely those recorded in our Gospels. As soon as sufficient time had elapsed from the apostolic period for the substitution of the citations of works for the record of well-remembered events, our present Gospels were named with special and exclusive reverence. The quotations of their substance, where the authors are not mentioned, are no more merely substantial than from the Old Testament and the New, or than many similar citations in modern authors. Mr. Waite obscures this by endeavouring to make it appear that the fathers trusted that the canonical Gospels, after he allows that they existed, and the ephemeral and heretical apocryphal utterances just alike. He is not always careful to confess that these quotations were most generally made in a different manner, just as a modern Methodist would differ in his citations from John Wesley and one of Wesley's non-Methodist contemporaries. Anyone who will consult Lardner's great work on the credibility of the gospel history, or even its megasynopsis in Paley's evidences, will see the fallacy of Mr. Waite's claims for equal honours. He only repeats the fallacies which Toland broached nearly 200 years ago, and which were repeated in the Examen Critique des Apologistes de la Religion Chrétienne, falsely attributed to the illustrious Ferret. The evidence for the genuineness of the canonical Gospels is far greater than that of any of the Greek or Roman classics. Many more manuscripts are in existence, and the slight discrepancies in style affect no important doctrine. According to the estimate of Norton, very high authority, the Christians of the latter part of the 2nd century must, hopefully this is continued, have had as many as I can't really see what that number is. Looks like thousands of copies. They existed in all parts of the then known world, and their material falsification of any one copy would be impossible, since both the orthodox and heretics appealed to them. It was not an uncritical age for the Christian who wrote the story of Paul and Theos, as a pious fraud was disciplined for his race conduct. No one could now alter the text of a book, copies of which existed in Boston, New York, Cincinnati, Chicago and San Francisco, without a discovery of the fraud, and such an act would have been equally difficult in regard to manuscripts deemed sacred, but on certain statements of which religious differences held to be important were based. The Muratorian fragment, a document dating back to about 170 AD, declares that the canonical books differed from the apocryphal forgeries as honey from gall, and it would have been at no time possible for any schemers to supersede the genuine books by others, still more if the latter contained statements not in accordance with prevailing tradition. We find, as we might expect, that the apocryphal books enjoyed only a limited and qualified respect in the early church, and as their real character became established, they were repudiated and forgotten. But Even without the Gospels, we have information in the New Testament books considered to be genuine by Mr. Waite, which shows that early Christianity was what the four Gospels affirm it to be. Any careful student of the epistles to the Romans, Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, etc. will find the resurrection, heavenly origin and divine power of Christ emphatically asserted. These letters are addressed to believers supposed to be already convinced of the facts of the gospel histories. Hence it is not to be expected that these last would be repeated in detail as if heathens were being argued into conviction of the truths. The greater includes the less, and so declarations of the voluntary humiliation of one who came from heaven, who rose from the dead, and who justified all believers through his blood, virtually include the working of miracles. And at all events, there's no evidence that any of the early Christians thought differently, and the heathen, Pliny AD 110, represents the believers of his day, and singing hymns, he represents the beginning of the believers of his day as singing hymns to Christ as God, while Celsus AD 178 repeats about everything in the Gospels, describing however Christ miracles to magic. He was critical enough in various particulars to show that he was no blind conceder of his opponents' claims, and has furnished even the unbelievers of our own day with many of their stock arguments. Yet he never pretended to deny the statements of the Gospels. He only tried to explain them away. It will never do as long as Pliny and Celsus continue to speak, or the Pauline epistles to be read, to affirm that there was no belief in the supernatural points repudiated by Mr. Waite. Furthermore, it is nonsense to say that the resurrection, to which minute testimony is borne in the 15th chapter of 1 Corinthians, on the evidence of apostles and of 500 brethren, many of whom were then alive, leaving out Paul's own experience near Damascus, that's his vision, etc., that he had seen Christ, and Christ was talking to him, was not a material one, but a mere subjective phenomenon. Such refinements may be labour-saving intentions, but Mr. Waite would have been more candid to admit with Bauer, B-A-U-R, the inexplicability of the resurrection history. Finally, in ascribing priority or authority to the three surviving apocryphal Gospels, Mr. Waite is not only in conflict with all Christian critics, orthodox and heterodox, but flies directly in the face of both Strauss and Renan, R-E-N-A-N, each of whom regard them as late and mentions them with contempt. The Oriental origin which he has devised for, it's really hard to see, enterprises, not really sure what that word is, I'm not really sure that is something in equality. Ridiculous. The Zoroastrian prophecy of the star cannot be shown to be pre-Christian, for it does not occur in the Zend Avesta, and even the Zend Avesta as we have it is a compilation of the 3rd Christian century. Abulfaragens, who tells the story, was an Armenian bishop of the 13th century. The Bhagavat Purana, which attributes to Krishna exploits very much like those of the apocryphal Gospels, and also parallels a few of the miracles of the canonical Gospels, is not as old as the days of Muhammad, being perhaps 3 or 4 centuries later. This is no assertion of ours, but the carefully formed opinion of German and English scholars, entirely free from theological bias. Such are the main points of a pretentious book, issued with a great flourish of trumpets, as a work which Christians would not be allowed to dismiss with a sneer. We think we have said enough about it, though we might add that we have noticed some needless blunders which show that the author is not as well versed in dealing with patristic literature as with legal questions. For example, he mentions in text and index Victor Capuanus as a church writer. There was a Victor Capuanus, or Victor of Capua, but Catina is the name of a classified collection of extracts and not of a man, as he seems to believe. He has no doubt been industrious, but he quotes a strange medley of authorities, many of them obsolete, and so largely on one side as to show that his opinion was made up before he began his work. Indeed, the book is obviously that of a special pleader, the production of a mere advocate. It never aims, as we have seen, to diminish the reputation of Christ by comparing him with unsavoury personages. It browbeats Irenaeus and Eusebius because they are important witnesses on the other side. It permits its own witnesses to tell only so much as is good for the cause, and to crown all, were its hypothesis admitted to be the true one, Christianity would exist as a causeless and inexplicable defect. Mr. Waite has not broken the array of Christian evidences, and he has made no addition to the really sharp assaults which have been directed against him. 8-volume Chicago, C.B. Waite and Company. Hopefully you understood that. It was very, very hard to read because it's very, very old. History of the Christian Religion to the year 200 by Charles B. Waite, A.M. And there's a quote there at the bottom. Truth is the daughter of time. Aulus Gellius in Noctes Atticus Atticai, 1881. Preface. This volume is the result of an investigation extending through several years and instituted for the satisfaction of the author. 2 years of the time was spent in the Library of Congress, which is peculiarly rich in the Department of Biblical Literature. It contains the writings of all the earlier fathers, in the original and an immense collection of the works of later writers. The intent to publish was formed upon ascertaining facts and arriving at conclusions which appeared of great importance, and which had never before been fully made known. To the accomplished librarian who furnished the author with every facility for the prosecution of his work and gave him much valuable information, he returns his sincere thanks. Also to the assistant libraries for the promptness with which the treasures of the library were from time to time placed at his disposal. It is believed that this will be found to be the most complete record of the events connected with the Christian religion during the first 2 centuries, which has ever been presented to the public. The time has been divided into 6 periods, and the different writers and events are carefully arranged in regular chronological order. In fixing the dates of the various writers, it was found that the subject was involved in much confusion. In each case, the different dates were carefully examined, and the one selected which appeared the most consistent and supported by the best authority. A comprehensive view is given of the Gospels of the first 2 centuries, with a brief sketch of those of a later date. The comparisons which have been instituted between the canonical and certain apocryphal Gospels is a peculiar feature of this work, and one which is believed to be of great importance in arriving at correct conclusions. The Gospel of Marcion has been reproduced from the writings of the Fathers, principally from the Greek of Epiphanius. This is something which, so far as the author is aware, has never before been attempted in this country, in this particular country, USA. The references to authorities will be found useful to those who may desire to pursue further the investigation of the questions discussed. The reader will find considerable repetition in the following pages. The importance of the subject and the necessity of examining many of the questions from different points of view would seem to justify, if not absolutely to demand, a restatement from time to time of the same facts and propositions in different chapters. In the preparation and publication of this work, the author has proceeded upon the assumption that the ascertainment of the truth is all important, and that its promulgation cannot fail to result in the permanent benefit of the human race. And then the author is under special obligation to the following people. The final result of the undertaking is submitted to the public in the hope that it may add something to the pages of reliable history.